Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.
Hello and welcome to Louisiana Public Square. I'm Beth Courtney, president of LPB. With us for tonight is Robert Travis Scott, president of the Public Affairs Research Council. Welcome, Robert.
Well, thank you, Beth. Well, you know, Beth, the state's finances have been described as being in crisis, okay? So over the past several legislative sessions, lawmakers have faced expenses that have outpaced revenues, but have primarily tackled the issue with tax increases and stopgap measures. But aside from the question of how much the state should collect in taxes or spend in revenue, many say Louisiana's tax code is uncompetitive and riddled with exemptions.
Well, Robert, what long-term solutions are lawmakers considering in the upcoming session? What measures have a viable chance of making it through the polarized body? How will choices in Baton Rouge affect your household's bottom line? We explore these issues and more on Fiscal Reform 2017. The typical Louisiana family might not realize how the state's fiscal mess affects day-to-day life. But Lake Charles Mayor Randy Roach says it's not difficult to see.
I see some real consequences to that. I see some real consequences when students can't get their top scholarship fully funded. I see the real impact of that. I understand the importance of mental health services. I understand the importance of foster care. I understand the importance of the charity hospital system.
Over the last several years, agencies and departments' annual plans for their budgets haven't panned out, and they've had to cut programs like those Roach mentioned. Lawmakers have also had to raise taxes, and those are set to expire in 2018. Projected expenses outpace projected revenues by $1.5 billion. Michael Olivier is CEO of the Committee of 100. It's a group that tries to attract businesses to the state. He says Louisiana's tax structure is making it difficult to convince companies to relocate or expand here.
They want to pay their fair share, but they want to know, how much am I going to be expected to pay this year and next? Because they've got a plan. And that's it. They've got to plan. It's the uncertainty that kills us. And right now, it's an uncertain situation that we're living in.
Olivier says the problem isn't new. He served as Secretary of Economic Development in the Blanco administration. Across the board, in sales, personal income, and corporate income taxes, Louisiana has high rates. But residents of the state pay less taxes overall when compared to other states.
We had the constant charge of trying to explain to business and industry that didn't have an experience in Louisiana that, okay, your tax rate is very high, your corporate income tax is high, and we would have to say, yes, but let me show you what we've done.
Officials have built deductions, exclusions, exemptions, rebates, and credits into the tax structure to lessen the effect of high rates. But those exemptions have grown substantially over the last 10 years.
That's where the cobbling together of different ways of avoiding taxation or eliminating taxation was done. It was all we were trying to be competitive and this is not done just in the last few years. This has been done over the last 50 years.
The Stelly Plan was a major attempt to repair the system in 2002. Lawmakers raised the individual income tax brackets so that taxpayers would owe more on their income to the state every year. In return, they exempted 3 high-grossing purchases from the state sales tax: food for home consumption, prescription drugs, and residential utilities. By the end of the decade, lawmakers made moves to reverse that decision.
The legislature decided to repeal the income tax increase, but the exemption for groceries and utilities was locked into the Constitution. So we got the best of both worlds as taxpayers.
The Stelly exemptions cost the state about $950 million last year, but they're just a piece of the total amount the state gives away. Sales tax exemptions alone cost the state about $2.7 billion. An annual report released by the Department of Revenue shows those giveaways total $6.8 billion, compared to $7.2 billion collected in taxes. Sales tax policy in Louisiana can be confusing for businesses in other ways.
You could have one store in two different cities, and that sales tax is going to be a little bit different depending on where they're located, and how you calculate it and where you file your forms and those kind of things.
Sales tax in Louisiana is collected on a local and state level. Local entities can apply the sales tax at different rates and on different purchases than the state. The single biggest exemption is the federal income tax deduction on individual income tax at $870 million, and Louisiana is one of only a few states to allow that deduction. That might seem like a red flag for policymakers. Over the last few years, various groups, including Olivier's Committee of 100, have included nixing it in studies making recommendations on what lawmakers can do to fix the tax code. Representative Jay Morris, a Republican from Monroe, says there are many sides to each issue. Morris says tax reform, the way the state earns money, is only one facet of the state's fiscal problems. The way the state spends money is at issue as well.
They're so intertwined. As a policymaker, I can't say, yes, I'll vote for this income because it's fair to tax these people until I know we actually need the money. Are there spending reforms that we can make that would obviate the need to get that money?
The upcoming session in April is the last regular session. Lawmakers will have a chance to tackle these issues before temporary taxes are set to expire in 2018.
Well, joining us to explore Fiscal Reform 2017 is our studio audience. It includes members of the business community, local officials, and tax experts. We also have a high school student from the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. Well, thanks to everyone for being here. Well, let's start by going over some of the recommendations in a report produced by a task force assembled by the legislature. Several members who sat on the task force, including myself, are here tonight. And part of the sales tax expansion that they talked about that was passed last year included temporarily eliminating several exemptions on the new penny tax. Now, the task force recommends cementing those on all the state sales tax, and that would broaden the sales tax base and allow an overall lowering of the rate. The task force also recommends bringing the local and state sales tax bases more in line with one another and creating a more uniform system of tax collection. As for the individual income tax, the task force recommends eliminating the state deduction for federal income taxes and reducing the excess itemized deduction in order to adjust the income brackets and reduce the rates by which workers are taxed. The most ambitious version of that plan would require a vote of the people in a constitutional amendment. Corporate taxes also have a deduction for federal taxes paid. The task force recommends getting rid of that deduction and lowering the top rate. It also suggests the state look to restructure, phase out, or eliminate the corporate franchise tax. The task force also recommends reviewing business incentive programs. So let's open it up from that point. So many concerns about our tax system and how it works. And first, I want to call on you, Sherry. Tell us a little bit about what in this whole controversial situation concerns you the most.
Thanks, Robert. I'm with the Louisiana Partnership for Children and Families, and we're a statewide child advocacy organization. And we have seen state agencies struggle year after year under these budget cuts. And so what we have seen are programs like the Child Care Assistance Program that supports low-income working families with their child care costs that has been cut over 60% over the last 8 to 9 years. And what I'm interested in seeing is how this fiscal reform is going to impact and improve the outcomes for our children in this state.
So for you, it's not just a matter of how it's structured, but whether or not there might be some more revenue coming in. Does anybody else agree with that or have a concern about that? How about you, Melissa?
Well, I'm Melissa Flournoy with Louisiana Progress Action, and Robert, I was in the legislature 25 years ago, and it's so frustrating to have the same conversations over and over again. We cannot cut our way to prosperity. We have gutted agencies. The Department of Children and Family Services has just been decimated. You know, we really need a common sense approach to look at revenue and budget stabilization to really put Louisiana back on level footing.
But can you tax yourself into prosperity? That's what a lot of people ask on the other side. How about you, Rolf?
Well, as Melissa said, I've been watching this for a long time too, and I know we always talk about tax or cut, but these days, you know, there's disruption in business. I mean, I'm in the media business, and it's, you know, not my dad's newspaper anymore, you know, my grandfather's. I mean, the idea of the way we get our news is quite different today. Well, the same way as I think with services, you know, we need to look at, for instance, you know, I'm on the LSU board. We have 14 four-year institutions, and we always talk about this, and these are some of the sacred cows that come up every time. And Jay Morris was talking about, you know, what are we going to do different? In business, you've got to do things different because there is no choice. Our system is not sustainable. We can't cut our way. We can't tax our way. We have to provide value. We now have internet universities that, you know, Arizona State has 100 degrees. They advertise in Baton Rouge now for students. You don't have to move to Arizona to go to school. You can do it from home.
So what you're trying to get across is that it's the priorities of the spending that are
right.
at issue.
And so we spend a little to all the universities, and we have mediocrity. And the point is that we can't sustain it, what we were set up by Governor McKithen back in the 60s. And so are we going to make tough decisions so that we can have money to do priorities like children?
Hey, Rolf, who's the publisher of the business report, just brought up this issue, Tommy, about business and how businesses look at all of this. What is your view? You're with Dow, is that correct?
That's right. I think a lot of the conversation continues to focus on the budget needs and then the taxes on business, but I think it's actually broader. It's not just the taxes on business, it's the cost of doing business as well. I think sometimes when we've had the business tax discussion, we continue to try to limit it to certain categories, this tax or that tax. It's about the cost of doing business. It costs more to transport goods in Louisiana because we haven't invested in infrastructure. It costs more because state taxes are increasing, but we also have some of the highest local sales tax rates in the nation. And so a dollar is a dollar wherever it's spent. And what I think we need to look at is if we really want to enable companies to grow jobs, we also need to look at the total costs. Every dollar they have to spend, whether it's at the state, local level, the cost to do business in Louisiana. I think all of those ideas are relevant.
You know, you brought up the sales tax, and yeah, we have 10 cents of sales tax in most places in Louisiana, and the highest combined sales tax state and local in the country. And that was added on last year as the extra penny. And now I'm wondering, does anybody really care? Did the extra penny make a difference to you or to the people in your area? Is it hurting you? Roland, you help head up a lot of the parishes, police juries for their association in the state. What about your folks?
I think that extra penny, and Scott and John, I'm sure are going to agree, we're watching the trend of local government whenever we go through renewal millages, and we find it more difficult to renew millages or pass a local property tax because, like Tommy talked about, a tax is a tax, and the folks don't try to figure out, am I getting the benefit of a homestead versus the raising of a sales tax? They just see a tax. And when they see that we have the highest sales tax in the nation, that causes a great pause when it comes to our voting for our local taxes. People just say no to say no.
Right, and well, the new penny that was added on doesn't go to local governments, right? It goes to the state, but how does that, maybe Steve, you're a mayor of one of our fine cities. Mm-hmm. Introduce yourself and
Sure.
tell us about this 1 cent and how that's affecting you.
I'm Steve Nosaka. I'm the mayor of the town of Gramercy, and we have 3,600 people, and it's a pleasure serving them. But one of the challenges always is ensuring that we're making the highest and best use of the funds that they trust us with. And that, so when the state needs another 1 cent for I'm not sure what, and that impacts on our ability to raise revenues to repair streets, improve drainage to keep water out of people's houses.
And how does how does it affect you in your spending in your city?
For me, for me and my family and my relatives and my friends who live in the town of Gramercy, I'm always going to be sensitive to what their total tax burden is.
Mm-hmm.
So it is, what's that cost of doing business, and living in town? So when the state generates more money for I'm not sure what, it's hard to explain when for me, my residents want to know, what do we spend that dollar on?
Now, John, you're with the Louisiana Municipal Association, the new chief. Congratulations on your new position. And here's one of your constituents. Do you think he speaks for a lot of mayors around the state?
I think he speaks for a lot of the mayors. There was concern, again, even though, as you said, that 1 penny was a state sales tax, it does trickle down. When we ask folks, our membership asks folks to go pass an extension of an existing sales tax or even a new sales tax. I think we're looking at, as Roland said, that trend of whether or not the people will resist that, looking at the 10 cents. And so that he does speak for a majority of our members.
So you think it's having an impact. And Jamie, now you are with the chamber on the west side of the river, right?
Correct.
Why don't you introduce yourself and also tell us how your constituents are looking at this tax environment and especially the extra penny.
I'm Jamie Hanks. I'm with the West Baton Rouge Chamber of Commerce. Every day I'm approached by a different company just with concerns and uncertainty about either relocating to our parish or expanding their existing facilities. And I don't know how to combat that uncertainty that's been created and restore confidence over the long term to keep them in our state and in our parish. They give so much back to our community, such as companies like Dow. We just can't afford to lose them. So that is my greatest concern.
Brandon, you're an accountant, is that right?
That's right. So,
okay, what do you make of all this?
Brandon Lagarde, I'm with CPA firm Postleware Netterville here in Baton Rouge. And on the topic of uncertainty, a lot of our clients are middle market, small business clients, and they want to pay their fair share, as stated by the video earlier, but it's getting harder to figure out what their fair share is. And the complexity that's being built into our tax system is difficult for companies to budget, to figure out what their liability will be. And it's not only a burden on the CPA Society and taxpayers and compliance, it's also been a burden on the State Department of Revenue. They've had the same challenges. So it's that uncertainty of what do I have to pay? What is my fair share? And that's really putting a burden on small and mid-sized businesses.
So that's a lot of where we are. There's a lot of limbo going on right now as we go into this next legislative session, this fiscal session, where we have some hopes that maybe some things can be done. But that's all the time we have for this portion of our show. So when we return, we'll be joined by our panel of experts to further explore Fiscal Reform 2017. Welcome back to Louisiana Public Square. Tonight we're discussing Fiscal Reform 2017. Well, joining us now is our panel of experts. State Senator Jack Donahue formerly chaired and currently serves on the Senate Finance Committee. He previously chaired the Louisiana Commission on Streamlining Government, which was created in 2009 to examine ways for the state to save money. Jan Moeller is director of the Louisiana Budget Project, which monitors and reports on state government financing and how it affects Louisiana's low to moderate income families. Camille Conaway is vice president of policy and research at the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, where she leads public policy analysis, development, and research initiatives. Dr. Jim Richardson, well, he may know more than anyone else about the deficiencies in the state's revenue structure. He is an economist with the E.J. Orso School of Business. He has trained many of the minds that work on the state budget and has served on the committee that estimates how much the state can spend. Well, before we go to our audience, I'd like to ask our panel a question and each give you a turn and a shot at it. Here we go into the legislative session. It's a fiscal session. We got to deal with taxes and fiscal matters. And what should happen and what really can happen in this legislative session. And Senator Donahue, you get to launch us off because you're in the center of the universe.
There you go. Thank you. Thanks for having me. So what should happen? I tell you, I think that if I was the governor, I would take the people that make a difference in this state and put them in a room, take the report that Dr. Richardson's group issued, and I wouldn't leave the room till I had a solution to the state's budget problems. What I think will happen is, I don't think that will happen. And I have a suspicion that's probably what's going to come out of this session, which fiscal-only session is probably nothing. And that there's a $400 million deficit, which is mostly part of continuation budget, which I don't see as being real dollars. I think we'll solve that problem relatively easy in this session, and we won't address the issue about how to reform the state's revenue system so that we can come up with a better, maybe a broader base, lower taxes, and proceed forward as a competitive state. I don't think that's what will happen, but I think that's what should happen.
A tough outlook, but probably very realistic. Jan Mulder, what do you think?
Well, I don't always agree with Senator Donahue, but I agree with him on this point. You know, in the last couple of years, there have been a number of studies of the state tax structure. It started with Dr. Richardson and Dr. Sheffrin from Tulane put out a tax study. The Conservative Tax Foundation put out a study of the state's tax system commissioned by the business community. The Tax Structure Task Force came out with its own recommendations. Our organization, the Louisiana Budget Project, we produced our own report that was released a few weeks ago. And there's remarkable agreement between these four reports from different ends of the political spectrum on what should be done to fix our tax structure. And it's what was in your report. It involves getting rid of some big deductions in the state income tax, personal income tax, lowering the state sales tax that is the highest in the country, broadening the base of that sales tax, and creating a system that is more sustainable, more adequate, and that gives us the money we need to fund state services. And so the experts, I think, across the political spectrum agree on what needs to be done, and I would hope that the legislature can work up the political will to do those things. It's 3 weeks before the start of the session, so I'm going to be optimistic and hope that that happens, but I think we all know there are some real political obstacles to making that happen, and my hope is that they don't simply kick the can down the road and renew what's on the books now and try to wait 2 more years to solve this problem.
Yeah, we may have to get by on optimism tonight, given the way you guys are coming at it. Camille, with the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, and by the way, we will be referring to that as LABI tonight for those of you who don't know the abbreviation. Camille, what do you think?
Sure. Thank y'all for having us. I would agree with Senator Donahue and Jan that that the HCR 11 Task Force report had a number of good places, to start, and that there is a significant agreement from the various organizations on what needs to happen on tax reform from a very general and broad perspective. What I think should happen in the legislative session is not only a discussion on tax reform, but on the budget side as well. I think you saw earlier in the program, the pace of spending is set to significantly grow faster than the pace of revenue. Even if we have the ideal tax structure, the pace of spending is growing much faster than that ideal tax structure would be able to keep up with over time. At some point, we are going to have to look at both sides of that balance sheet. If we want to do tax reform, we need to look hard at the budget, not only on spending, but at the structure of the budget and how we prioritize those dollars. There are very few dollars in the budget right now that can be reprogrammed to high priority items. We've locked that up over time. In many ways, we're facing a decades-long set of problems on both the tax and the budget front. And the last thing I would say is that look should not ignore what's happening outside the Capitol in terms of the economy. The state is in a bona fide recession at this time, with 25,000 jobs lost in the last 18 months. We can't set tax policy or spending priorities ignoring what's happening outside the building. So I think a very comprehensive approach goes beyond tax reform. And in terms of what can happen, I think it is a hybrid of what was said before. I think there is a strong possibility that the temporary sales tax increases are extended, or that we'll leave the session without a solution and be back in the fall or the spring in a special session.
Okay, good wrap up. Dr. Richardson, you've forgotten more than most of us know. Tell us what your outlook is.
Well, if we start with what we would hope would happen, it's like Senator Donahue said, and Jan and Camille said, and ideally they should get down to brass tacks very quickly and say, look, we need to have a tax structure that is going to be more than 1 year in length. It's going to be a 10 to 20 year perspective. We note that if you look at the Tax Foundation, a conservative leaning group, you look at certain groups that are much more liberal oriented, they are suggesting, as Jan said, to take away some of the same exemptions, lowering some rates. But I think the very first thing the legislature has to do, as Camille suggested, they've got to decide how much do we really want to spend. And if we really want to spend whatever that number is, then we have to have enough money to pay for it. There's no alternative. So we have to find the right tax system, the right tax structure to do that. Once we find out how much we want to spend, then we say, okay, this is a tax structure. And we have a tax structure very weighted towards the sales tax right now, which has a couple of problems with it. One, it subtracts from the locals, takes away their ability to take care of themselves. It puts a larger burden at the lower income categories. And it also is more of a business tax than people may think it is. We have, on the income tax, we really have a relatively low rates compared to other states. We can make that even lower by getting rid of some of the exemptions, and as we've suggested, like the federal income tax deduction. But those are very tough things to do politically. I think at the end of the day, if I were a betting man, I would say we'll end up with a 5-cent sales tax. It will be renewed for a couple of years, past the next election, and then we'll come back and have this show all over again.
All right. Well, the panelists have set the table. I like your idea about locking everybody in the room and maybe not give them any food. It'd be a great way to go. I'm going to let Scott Richard kick things off. Scott, why don't you introduce yourself? And you have a very important role to play in the state, and you have quite a perspective on all this.
Thank you, Robert. Scott Richard, Executive Director of the Louisiana School Boards Association. And earlier in our dialogue, we talked about the uncertainty that's unhealthy, not only for business and industry, but for all taxpayers, but also in that discussion are local governments, local school boards, local municipalities, parish government. And while we spent over 6 months in legislative session in 2016, 2 special sessions, a regular session, we just completed another regular session in 2017, that uncertainty is starting to trickle down to people on the ground, and especially local governments like school boards. And I guess our question tonight is, as the proposed reforms move forward, if they move forward, do you see a modification or a reduction, or what type of impact do you see in funding for the basic government service of public education?
And in the current way we do this, several $1 billion a year of state revenue money is collected and distributed to the school districts across the state. So it is a relevant subject. Who would like to go first? Senator Donahue, you're gonna have to answer this one first. You're going to set the tone. So.
Well, Scott, I appreciate that one. And when I've gone around the state and talked to people around the state, I got to tell you, the priority in the state for the people in the state is education, health care. Always public safety is number one. But if I could be king for a day, what I would do is take all the services that the state provides, put $1 on them, and then I'd go to Revenue Estimating Conference and get a figure from Dr. Richardson, and then I'd put everything on the table and know what my budget was, and I'd take off the most important things off that table first. And when I got to where my budget was, everything on the table would go away. So I feel comfortable that priority to the state of Louisiana is education. The way the structure of the state is, we can't prioritize our spending. I think pretty much we have $4 billion of discretionary money, and $3 billion goes to K through 12 education. We also have to fund higher education and health care out of those dollars. So we have to get to the rest of the dollars in the state. I think we've got to eliminate the programs that aren't effective in the state to be able to put money where the priorities are. Listen, I know that's your job, but my job as a legislator is to know what the priorities of my people that I represent are, and those priorities are education. Everybody understands that if we can't educate our kids, then we can't really have a state. If we can't educate them and we can't have a state, then we can't provide jobs for them. And the whole thing breaks down. So education's a key. It always has
again,
been.
Senator, I think what you're saying, it's a matter of making that a priority, and that's the issue. Jan Moeller, why don't you tell us a little bit about your perspective to his question?
I think this is a perfect example of the consequences of this 8 years of budget crisis we've had in the state. Public schools from the state level is funded through the MFP, and that's a constitutional formula. And for years and years, there was an inflation factor built into that MFP. So you could expect to get a little cost of living increase for teachers and school boards at the local level. But that has largely been frozen, I think, all but 1 year since this fiscal crisis started. And that means local school boards have to absorb those extra costs for retirement and so on and so forth. And maybe it's okay to do that 1 year or 2 years, but we're going on 8 or 9 years of frozen funding for public schools on a per pupil basis, and that starts to really have an effect. When I first started hanging around the Capitol, the talk every year was about bringing teacher pay up to the southern regional average. We don't have that conversation anymore. We're way past that because I think school boards are just struggling to get around. So this is one of the many examples, and your budget is protected. Higher education in the state support for higher education has been cut farther and faster than in any other state in the country because that is not protected constitutionally. Public schools, K through 12, have suffered because of the lack of inflation, but you are one of the protected parts of the budget. So I think this speaks to the necessity of getting the whole picture right and finally starting to reinvest in some of the things we just haven't been funding in the last few years.
Very good. Now, our high schooler, Nicholas, has been on the edge of his seat and wants to jump in. So, Nicholas?
Hello, my name is Nicholas, and I'm with the Legislative Youth Advisory Council. And truth of the matter is, I'm a high school student. I'm not a tax expert.
Yeah, where are you at North Shore?
Yes, I am.
Okay.
I'm a senior. So, and I don't really understand how can we simplify our tax code, because I see that we have a lot of people who really don't know anything about our state tax. It's very convoluted. I worked as a page and an aide in the Senate this past year, and just passing out the bills, they're stacks thick. No one really understands them. How can we get people more civically involved and help decrease this issue?
That's a great question, and one of the leading state tax experts is here to try to answer it for you. Jim Richardson.
Yeah, Nicholas, that's a good question, and it's also hard to answer, too. If you look at the federal tax code, you'll need to have your weights, make sure you're well conditioned before you try to lift it. The state tax code is just a little bit thinner, but not a lot. And I think part of that is, by the very nature of our society, any tax code is going to be complicated, but I think you need to get down, what do individuals really want to know? Typically, they want to know, how much did that cost me? And if this so-called expert wants to change it, what will be the impact on me? And typically they can figure that out pretty quickly. It doesn't take them too long to do that. And I think then you have to really say, okay, if it's going to cost me more, why? And what am I getting for it? Is it acceptable for me to pay? If I'm a business, is it going to give me some concerns about the profitability of my business here in town? So I think it's impossible to make the tax code really, really simple, as much as we'd like to, because it's just by the nature of the way we earn income, the different types of taxes we have, there will be some complications. But I think and this is, I think, one of the hard part for the legislators, as they talk about taxes, they have to come back to constituents such as you or your parents or your friends, and Jack is talking about doing what to me? He's raising which taxes is he raising on me? My part, my goodness, what, is he gone mad or what? And I think that's the type of attitude you get. So you got to be able to explain it very quickly. And I hope that can be done, but I agree that's a very important question, a very important problem.
I think I can explain it very quickly. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. Samuel, you work with a special organization that might be impacted by everything that's going on.
Right. Samuel Rotman from the Bread or Stones Campaign for Children. It's a coalition of 10 churches across the state of Louisiana that work for children's needs, and we work against child poverty in the state of Louisiana. My question is, how would the earned income tax credit impact low and medium income families, and what impact would that have on their children? And what impact would that have on our budget down the road?
Since this is Jan Moeller's favorite question, can you very, very quickly summarize what the EITC is, and then give us a highlight on it?
The Earned Income Tax Credit started at the federal level. It's been around since the 1970s. Louisiana is one of the only states in the South that has a state-level credit. It was put here through the efforts of Melissa Flournoy and others in 2007. That's the good news. The bad news is our Earned Income Tax Credit is the lowest of all the states that have a state-level EITC. What it is a tax credit, a refundable tax credit that goes to working families with children. And in Louisiana, where we have high poverty rates, almost 1 in 3 tax filers can claim the EITC. It's one of the easiest tax credits to administer because it's pegged to the federal credit. It costs the state about $49 million a year, so it's not one of the more expensive credits on the books. And when it gets down to the family level, it's about $80 to $90 on average for a low-income family. And that may not sound like a lot, but that can be the equivalent of several tanks of gas to help somebody get to work, or months' worth of diapers, or meals, or some of the basic necessities.
What we're at now is we have this now in Louisiana, our own Earned Income Tax Credit, and there's a discussion about whether some people want to get rid of it, some want to make it bigger, and that's part of what's going on. I know Tommy wants to jump in here. So.
Yeah, and not to cut off your synopsis, but as we get into the larger budget structure debate and fixing the problem so that year after year we don't have to have these same conversations, and I think individual groups don't have to ask these questions. You all agreed, I think, earlier that we're going to at least push out another year plus on permanent fixes to the budget structure. What is the damage that's being done year after year on, and I'm not going to just say businesses, but the whole economic system that helps create jobs? And every year it seems that we push out real fixes, we continue to see less job creation. And our company is a great example. Dow's the largest chemical manufacturer in Louisiana. 6,000 or so people get their salary, that's our employees and contractors, based on our business in Louisiana. That's almost $450 million in salaries that we pay. And then, of course, they obviously reinvest that money, they pay taxes. And so it seems that, every year we push off the problem, we create less jobs, and so then that's less revenue.
Right.
How do we get out the cycle? How many years do we push
Camille
that?
Conaway with LAWB take the first shot at that.
Sure. I mean, I think you all touched on it earlier about unpredictability, and even in the video early on, that's almost as damaging as finding out, what the new level of taxation is actually going to be. I think, I talked about it earlier. We do need tax reform. We also need budget reform. We also need spending reform. All of the parties involved, all of these stakeholders, need predictability and stability going forward. And I think a lot of the reasons for the recession right now in Louisiana is the oil and gas downturn. What we're seeing as the price of oil creeps back up is reinvestment in places that are stable and predictable. Rigs are coming back online in Texas in shale fields. They're coming back online in North Dakota. They are not coming back on here for reasons of taxation and litigation. and regulation. And so when you have unpredictability on a range of fronts, you may have reinvestment happening and the economy coming back, but it may not come back in this state. And particularly as we look nationally at the efforts to pull manufacturing back to the United States, when we're in a position that is unpredictable and unstable, we are not poised to benefit from any return of the manufacturing that some of the federal government will be focused on.
And
in
Dr.
those next few
Richardson,
years.
is it fair to say that the ultimate best fix for all this would be a really thriving, growing economy?
There's no doubt the best thing for a set government is for the economy to be growing. Then tax revenues are automatically growing, and you don't have to worry about shortfalls or cutting or things of that nature. But I think the idea of the unpredictability is very important around the globe. I think Scott or John said something earlier about a lot of institutions suffer from that. And also just this recent downturn because of oil and gas, as Camille was talking about, it has affected us for many years in the sense that we've not really diversified our economy. You go to Texas, oil and gas all over the place, but they have diversified their economy. A much bigger geographic area, much bigger state, but they have a lot of different types of industries. We have not really diversified our economy over a number of years now. And this is why oil and gas goes down, the whole economy really kind of sinks a little bit. And I think uncertainty in terms of the quality of public services, in terms of the tax that you might be asked to pay, in terms of the people willing to move here, all of those things causes us to not have the same growth rate as other states.
And I think Jacques wanted to talk about the uncertainty of higher education outlook,
Yeah,
right?
so we've all been discussing, Jacques PT, I'm a senior at LSU, 6 more weeks. We keep talking about the uncertainty of businesses, but I think a lot of times we forget the uncertainty of high school seniors as they make their decision for college. Mr. Fauché talked about the cost of doing business, and one of that is training employees and keeping them in state. And now more than ever, I see my peers more willing to accept a burden of debt to go to a higher institution, whether it be Alabama or Georgia. And that is becoming more uncertain as we see these TOPS cuts. This is the first year that in the program's history we've seen a cut. So my question is, we've talked about tax reform, but just on the fiscal side, what are some of the fiscal reforms that you all think would be practical in terms of looking at the longevity of the program, as well as other programs such as Go Grants that affect low-income students, to keep our best and brightest in the state so that they become contributing taxpayers in Louisiana?
Something tells me you want Senator Donahue to answer that question.
Open floor to anyone.
Go ahead, Senator.
Well, you know, you can't disengage what's going on in the state from a business standpoint from the educational endeavors. So as this state continues to tax businesses and raise taxes on business, if any of y'all are students of the game, you understand that over the years, we continue to have less and less taxes from business. It's the old adage about if you want more of something, tax it less. You want less of something, tax it more. So as we continue to tax businesses, we keep losing business. That being said, the solution, as Dr. Richardson, I hope I'm not paraphrasing something incorrectly, but a lot of the solutions to the problem is the economy of the state. We got to kick the economy of the state and get it to move. Oil and gas is down, but the state has so many other attributes that we should be using. Education is, you know, when I ran 10 years ago, it was to keep our kids home. And I really believe that. I have 6 of them, and 4 of them still live here, but 12 of the grandkids. So to me, that's vital. We need to keep students such as yourself. We need to keep you here in the state. We can't do it without money, and the money's got to come from someplace. Can I go? Can I say one
Okay,
thing?
yeah, add on one more. Sure, go ahead.
When I did Streamline, we cut $1 billion out of state government, and the following year we had this deficit. And I said, I'm an engineer. I said, there's an equal sign here. So we did a commission in that looked at the revenues of the state, because there's 2 sides to the equation, not just cut. There's also what do we do with our revenues? And I found that we don't do a very good job with the revenues that we have in the state. We give a lot of revenues away. These programs that we talk about, and listen, I'll say motion pictures, for example, where we spend $180 million. Do you want to spend $180 million in motion pictures, or do you want to spend $180 million in education in the state of Louisiana?
Yeah, you're talking about the credit program to
And
spur on the
and
movie
there's
industry.
a lot of credits like that I disagree with, and we're working to try to get some of those out. That would free up some of the money to put
Okay.
it with things that are so important for the state.
Steve, the Honorable Mayor of
you,
Gramercy.
Did you take tops from us throughout these last 4 years?
I did.
And what are you going to do about that, the investment we've made in you?
Well,
there you go, Steve.
Well, my response to that
Hey.
is, in order to, if you want to invest in me when I graduate,
I already did invest in you.
I like to have something there to invest back in. A lot of my friends are going to Houston right now because that's where the jobs are.
Right.
Okay, Steve.
Now we spend lots of time, and one of the hats I wear is as economic development consultant for St. James Parish. Lots of new industries exploring the potential to come in. Lots of existing industries looking at expanding, and that uncertainty is a challenge to all of them. It seems to take forever from initial announcement to actual construction, and it does. It takes several years, and I can appreciate that. But some of those things that, the rules of the game change during the development of the project, and as a result, sometimes companies need to take a fresh look at the environment. But the tax, as Tommy's mentioned, the
how
total
much do
cost.
taxes matter in your economic development world?
It is it's a component. It's not the single. Remember, we still have the Mississippi River, and we still have enough natural gas and other resources to provide for petroleum and chemical manufacturing, fertilizer manufacturing, a lot of basic industries. But forgive me, before you jump, let me.
Sure, yeah.
I want to. I can't get past Senator Donahue's comments about budgeting, and that's really what's for me. Imagine how much public confidence in state government would be restored if the state took Senator Donahue's proposed approach to budgeting and eliminated and put on the table all of those things that all the money that the state moves in lots of directions and appeasing lots of different constituencies for us in the towns. We get a $35,000 a year LGAP grant, Louisiana Government Assistance Program. What a shame. I don't need your money. I really don't. It's about $5 million a year, right? I'll take it. I'll take it if it's there.
He just knocked it off the list. He just made one budget cut.
Same thing with the capital outlay for local governments. Man, that's about time.
So lock them in a room and make the priorities.
Grow up and realize that if you need to build if you need to rehab your water system, man, your ratepayers really need to look at paying for it.
That's right. Rob.
Well, back to something that Camille talked about on both sides. Dr. Richardson comes from the College of Business. We talk about the structure of our tax system, which certainly needs discussion, but it's back to the other side, that if in your business, you're an engineer, if the money's not there and the old way of doing engineering, I know the CAD system came in, you're not still doing it the old way, are you? You're actually embracing and using the new way. What are the things that we need to change about? A lot of government still operates those grants he's talking about. Those are decades old. Why are we still doing that? In business, we're not Blockbuster. We're not Encyclopedia. We're not Kodak. These things go away. If you notice, even Sears is closing and JCPenney's, guys. And this is where government can't keep operating. Now, as Senator said, a lot of these things are locked in. But we can't keep doing business the same way we've always done before and expect different results. That's insanity, right? So in addition to I'm not just talking about cuts. I'm talking about elimination. I'm talking about restructuring. Why is government exempt? Why are schools exempt? Why are local governments exempt? Where's the technology? Yeah. We all have to adapt.
Ms. Conaway or Mr. Mueller, you want to respond to that?
Well, I understand, and I've heard versions of this for a long time, and I think there's this thing in the public imagination where they think like there is a magic pot of government waste at the end of the rainbow where all the waste is, and if we just find that waste, then we can solve our budget problems. But I think when you look at what the state really has to spend, we have a $30 billion budget that the governor proposed, and about $9.5 billion of that is general fund, and about $3.5 billion of that general fund is discretionary general fund. When you look at where that goes, 90% of it, 9 out of 90% supports human services, healthcare, and education. These are investments we're making in our people. These are services, by and large, that people need, and a lot of that is going to support children who didn't ask to grow up in the circumstances where they are. So I think we have to.
But it's not just dollars, because LSU used to run the charity system. And I know when we had it and we moved to the private partners told me, we went into the docs and they said, we see 10 patients a day. And they explained, no, we see 30 a day here.
And we're spending
you're going to do it our way, and you're going to triple your productivity, and you're going to see things in weeks and not months.
And we're spending 30% more on our charity hospital system than we were before it got privatized.
But the idea, so you would go back to the charity
for that
system,
money.
the only state in the nation with a charity. You would go back to that populist system that you all came up with many, many decades ago. Is that what you're saying?
I'm not saying that, but I'm saying we are buying something very important for these discretionary state general fund dollars that we spend, which is the only pot of money that Senator Donahue and his colleagues have control over, and most of it is going to support vulnerable families in our
So how do we change
state.
that? They have control over more than with that.
I think what we'll do is bring in a couple of dueling pistols, because I like the way this is going. But, Melissa? Yeah. Okay. We'll let our panelists. Go ahead.
I wanted to go back to Jacques' question
Yeah.
about TOPS, and it kind of ties into this. Because there's so little discretionary funding is the reason something like TOPS is not funded. The taxpayers of this state are paying $1.3 billion in additional sales taxes this year. This year, in the budget that's going to be proposed, there's $1.3 billion in additional revenue that was not there last year, but TOPS is still not funded. We have prioritization issues. Dedicated locked up funding is a major problem. The legislature does have control over whether they keep that dedicated or not. And so you've had literally billions annually that is on autopilot, that is scarcely looked at. It may be funding priorities, and maybe we want to keep it that way, but we don't know until we open that up.
Do we need to re-examine the Constitution and free some of that up? Is that what you're saying?
I think potentially, but there are billions that are in statute that we don't have to go back and ask the people again about, that I think we need to take a hard look at. We shouldn't be able to raise that much revenue and still not fund what a lot of voters consider a top priority.
I think Camille was talking about the statutory dedications, which they can do. They're out there. I think in the Romer years, we did away with those dedications. Rolf may remember that. You know how long it lasted? About 2 years. And they all got back into statutes within about 2 years or so. They were there. Part of that is because people want them. And they don't want the legislature to mess with them. Because those boys get working with the issues, you don't know what happened.
Amen. Roland, how's everybody doing? We doing good? Is it a good grade, everybody? You give them an A, B, C? How you grade the panel?
The whole panel?
Yeah.
What about one?
No, just the whole panel. No. Melissa's been on the edge of her seat. Melissa, come on.
Well, I think that there's some principles here that we need to focus on. Fairness of taxes, who's paying the taxes. I believe that the resilience or the reliance on sales taxes disproportionately affects lower income and working people. There's an issue around adequacy of taxes, and so do we have enough money to fund the government that we need, and then stability. And so, I'm still frustrated by the rollback of the Stelly plan after we went through a whole lot of work. That was sort of Fiscal Reform 2.0, I guess, Jim.
Yes.
With a Republican governor in 2003, and another Republican governor sort of rolled back several of those things. We've got a very good plan that many people in the legislature agree with, that as a result of Dr. Richardson's plan. So how do we come back around to stability? Because what's missing for Louisiana is fairness, adequacy, and stability, because we are going to continue to kick the can down the road, and that's what's so frustrating, I think, to all the citizens of Louisiana.
And it happened, and people are trying to look at new versions of what can happen now, but that was a long time ago, and we've got a lot of problems we have yet to solve. We have we're just kind of closing out here in the last couple of minutes. I want to give y'all a quick chance to just close out with your parting thoughts on this. We're going to start with you, Dr. Rich, and address any of the questions that have come up here. Anything else you want to say?
I think the first thing with Rolf's issue about the government has to change, I think government does change, but I don't think it can change in quite the same way your company has changed over the last 20 years, Rolf. It's going to be slower than that. And you can see it as member of the board of LSU. LSU has changed, but not as much as your company has. I'm positive.
That's probably right.
So I think that it's going to be, and also part of the thing is, as Jan was saying, the types of services it offers cannot just be suddenly changed enormously. So I think that's what, it's always going to be a bit slower, but it's changed enormously. And then I think in the tax system, we really need to convince the people, because the Stelly plan was introduced by vote of the people. It was taken out by vote of the legislature, and we should be honest about this. It was Governor Blanco did the first part of it, Governor Jindal did the second part of it. But now you talk about trying to put it back on, the legislators will say, hey, wait a minute. Everybody says, all of my constituents say, I don't like it.
We've been there, we've done that. Let me let Ms. Conaway close out.
I completely agree with that last point on public trust. I think you see nationally, public distrust in government is at an all-time high. The media, of all institutions. If we're going to do systematic reform, we have to be honest that it is going to be messy, that there are going to be things that go away that people like, whether it's on the tax front or the budget front. There are constituencies that are going to be angry, but in the long term, if we do it the right way, we can get to what goal? What is the vision? We need our elected officials, our state leaders, to show us where we're trying to go and make that case publicly for how we get there and why we're all going to benefit from that stability.
Mr. Mueller?
I'm struck by the common threads here. I think almost everyone here tonight agrees that we need some more stability in our tax system. And I think we also mostly agree on what the solutions are. What's lacking is the political will to get it done at the legislative level. And as Camille said, it absolutely will cause pain to some. It will cause controversy. But if we get this right, I think we can put the not just state government in a good place, but really help the broader economy and help families get ahead and give businesses the certainty that they're looking for. So I think ultimately we're looking at a win-win, and but I don't think the answer is to keep cutting government.
So it sounds like there's going to be pain if we do, pain if we don't. Senator Donahue, close us out.
This state, with the power of the governor, reacts to leadership, and we need a leadership role on the part of the governor to solve the problem that we have. Listen, there's no other way to say it. By the time we finish adding a tax to business, I've been back to my office with my accountants and have already figured out how not to have to pay that tax. So we continue to tax businesses, and the tax revenue we receive from business continues to go down. Something's wrong. We can't keep doing it like we're doing it right now. It needs to be broad. Business needs to be involved with it. Individuals need to be involved. And we can come up with a plan that offers the stability and the finances. We can't tax ourselves to prosperity, and we can't cut this government to a point where it's efficient. So there's something in between that we need to find, and I think that's what we need to work at. I'll look for the leadership to be able to do that.
And Senator Donahue, thank you for your leadership, and keep up the good fight. Well, we've run out of time for our question and answer segment. We'd like to thank our panelists, Senator Donahue, Mr. Mueller, Ms. Conaway, and Dr. Richardson, for their insights on this month's topic. And when we come back, we'll have a few closing comments. Well, that's all the time we have for this edition of Louisiana Public Square. We encourage you to visit our website at lpb.org/public square. And while you're there, comment on tonight's show. We'd love to hear from you. Now, our next month's Louisiana Public Square will delve into the state's coastal land loss problem. Is it too late to rebuild? Will the state's fiscal issues impact the flow of money to all these projects? And which projects produce the most land for the lowest cost? Well, tune in Wednesday, April 26th. And thanks for watching, and good night.
For a copy of this program, call 1-800-973-7246 or go online to www.lpb.org.
Support for this program is provided by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and from viewers like you.